Hey, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Do you have something you'd like some help with? Ask our guests. Go to professorgame.com/question and get your question answered in a future episode. Engagers, today we have Melinda Jacobs. And Melinda, the first thing is, are you prepared to engage?
Bring it on.
Let's do this, Melinda. So she is an entrepreneur, gamification wizard, and N7 paragon. You'll explain to us later what does that mean. She specializes in perfecting the telling and sharing of narratives through interactive experiences to create behavior change. She's the founder and managing director of Subatomic, a digital agency taking engagement to the level over 9,000. She's a proud Dutch. They are the proud Dutch partner of Converge, an Interreg EU project that promotes collaboration and connection of creative companies within the North Sea region. Mentor, coach, and advisor to startups like Ticketless.ai, greenApes, and Lootcakes. She's also an international speaker and gives workshops and talks all around the world. She's published research in peer-reviewed journals as well as on the review board for several publications. So the first thing is, what does N7 Paragon mean, Melinda?
Well, it's actually from one of my favorite games ever called Mass Effect. And in that game, one of the reasons I like it is because you make a series of choices. And so you have different options where you can sort of choose, okay, A or B. And all of these different choices you make throughout the game actually affect the narrative of the game. So in the first, it's a trilogy. Technically, there's a fourth, but the original three, something you do in the first game can actually affect what happens to you in the third game. And N7 Paragon is sort of on the fluid spectrum of better behavior versus more rebellious behavior. I always typically end up being a paragon, so on the better side of the spectrum, I guess. I just make more good choices than bad, I guess. I don't know if that's better or worse. Maybe it would be better to be more rebellious, but that's what it means.
Fantastic. Melinda, is there anything else you would like to bring forth that we didn't mention in the intro?
I think you covered it.
So, Melinda, what does a regular day with you look like?
Yeah, every day is a little bit different, actually, because I'm lucky. I get to travel a lot for work. I get to work with a lot of very interesting companies and projects. So usually I feel like at least half the time I spend on the train going to different meetings in different cities. A lot of coffee, definitely a lot of coffee. Decaf though, so I guess it only half counts as coffee for most people.
You enjoy the taste, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I enjoy the taste, but not so much like the incessant need to feel to like run around the room after like a couple cups of actual coffee. So I try to pace it a little bit. I'm high energy enough as it is. But so just working and coaching with different people, and I like to spend some time reading. Because it's always good to keep up on what other people are doing and what their perspective on the industry, their perspective on the world, some current events.
Interesting. So Melinda and I met at Gamification Europe. I had followed her for a bit before that, and she's a fantastic speaker, I have to say. And of course, she's always, as she says, she's traveling, going around the world and doing many interesting things. But I'm sure it's not always, rainbows and unicorns. And that's something that we would like to get into right now, Melinda. And it's of a time of what you would like to call your favorite fail or the first attempt in learning when creating a game or a gamification project. And of course, as usual, these fails or these attempts in learning normally lead us to either a great success or a future learning that is very useful for something else. Can you tell us a story of that?
Yes, I mean, I have so many, but I think the one that I would choose is at one point we were doing an educational project. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to build just a full-fledged game to help teach people about finances. And so we're working with a corporate company on this project, and we designed this artwork, this kind of character style. And we thought, okay, well, you know what? It's maybe a good idea to go test this with an audience, see how they respond to the style. So actually, we took it to sort of a program that actually watches people's brains inside of an MRI when they show them different images. They have a lot of experience with things like that, and we showed them this character that we designed, and we're like, okay, hey, here's a couple different options. Which character do you think people would respond to best? And so they're like, oh, okay, well, this first character, which was a little bit, it was more playful than the others, a little bit goofy, a little bit charismatically clumsy, I suppose you could say. And so we thought, okay, hey, great, let's go with this. And we started the project. And one of the big things that I took away as learning from this was the fact that, okay, we took this fun character, we started to make this game, but one of the challenges the client, the corporate company, was having difficulty fully committing to a really playful world. And when we were trying to design the experience, there was always these moments where we were trying to find this middle ground between, okay, really committing to this playful storyline, this immersive world where, okay, even though there's a theme about finance in it, we're still actually trying to keep up with a world of play. And, okay, no, this is about finance and this is a more serious brand and we have to still keep some of the seriousness. And I can tell you that does not really work in the end of the day. It's really one of my big advices, and something from this point on when I've done any project is if you want to go fully playful and you really want to embrace that, you want to go about building something fictional in order to explain real life rules or concepts, you have to fully go for it. Because otherwise what you can end up with is, even, for example, this character that we tested that looked, okay, everyone's going to like this. At the end, because the experience wasn't fully committed to being playful, it actually didn't end up working so well. So even though scientifically it was like, okay, yes, this is testing well in people's brains, this is something that they're going to like for sure, it's this style, it still needed to fit with the actual way that we were telling the story in the game, and actually fully embracing how playful it needed to be in order to create a whole experience instead of sort of a mixture of both worlds. And now, of course, mixtures of both worlds are always possible, but not so much if you really go for that strong, playful, extra outside narrative in a project like that.
Yeah. And I guess that one of the things that I would bring from that as well is maybe when you think about several pieces and you try to tie them together, those pieces, if that by themselves they're successful, it doesn't mean that together they're going to be successful as well. And same happens with pieces that are maybe not successful by themselves. You can put them together and maybe it's a massive success. So in the end, I've heard many times as well speak of systems thinking, and the whole idea that everything is a system in itself, whether it's digital or non-digital. That you have to think about the things not only by themselves, which is very important as well, but how do they work together? So that's something I guess you're thinking about differently now when you think if it's going to be full on super playful or not, and how it all ties together.
Absolutely, because nothing exists inside of a vacuum. There's absolutely no project or component of a project that will ever just be completely 100% standalone. There will always be the way that the world looks at it. There will always be the way that you're projecting it. There will be the way you communicate about it. There will be the way that it interacts with other elements around it, whether directly connected or not. And it's all well and good to test things and get some validation and say, okay, hey, this clearly works. But it always has to go back to, and you can call it system thinking, you can call it an overarching narrative, you can call it storytelling, but it all comes back to how does it relate to this main message and this main vision that I have. And in secondary to that is, along with the interworking of, okay, everything has to kind of work as a system. This is also why it's very difficult to only go halfway with something. When you start to create the system and when you start to create this world that all of these pieces are going to help you tell a story through, if you hold yourself back or if you're afraid of going that full path, it's just better to instead take things back a notch, then don't go so playful. Or, if you think that you can't sustain that and that's not the best way to tell your story, then it's better to take a step back and say, okay, how can we tell this story with these pieces? And how can we approach this in a way maybe that's not as out there or not as outside of our comfort zone than it is to try to sort of go outside of that, but yet still at the same time feel safe.
Definitely. That's lovely, and as you say, the overarching theme or narrative is fundamental, and it's a way to integrate the whole thing. But now, Melinda, we would like to take a 180-degree spin, and instead of going for that favorite fail, we would actually like to go for something that perhaps you could say you're proud of, or a massive challenge that you've faced and actually solved and had a great success with while using gamification or game thinking.
Yeah, I mean it's a little difficult to answer because some of my favorite challenges I can't actually talk about.
the famous NDAs of the industry.
NDA. It's the biggest cop out I guess all of us have when we do interviews like this. But no, I mean, what I like about approaching projects or approaching challenges like this is that it always comes down to how do you understand people. And how do you understand what stories you're telling to them and how those stories are affecting people? So, for example, in a case inside of another corporate, is they were having trouble getting people to adapt to a software system. And so they were having trouble getting these salespeople to actually use the system, enjoy the system. I mean, the system was getting basically free money for these salespeople because their customers could just go online and actually, just re-register for something without them having to even talk to the customer, but at the same time still get the commission. And so you would think, okay, wait, why is this? How can it possibly be that people are getting free money and they're upset about it? They don't want to use that tool. Well, this comes down to thinking about, okay, what is the story you're telling and where do all these people that you're working with fall into that story? And what had happened in this case that we figured out is actually they had just published a lot of material where instead of talking about the sales agent, they talked about the platform. And it's something so small like that. But what they basically did is they took people out of the story. And so, when people get taken out of a story, but yet you still expect them to kind of be performing within it, you're going to get pushback. There's not going to be this level of understanding of, okay, yeah, here's where I fit within this world that you're describing to me. And so what they're going to do? They're going to reject the entire story. They're not going to see any of the benefits of it. They're not going to be like, oh, okay, I'm kind of fine with seeing this benefit, but, I don't really feel my place, but hey, okay, I'll get over it. No, they're just going to reject the entire narrative because they don't feel part of it. And I think that, challenges like this, in this example and also in others, of understanding people and understanding their relation to the story you're telling and the stories they will tell about the stories you're telling, is I think something I'm really proud of, that we've been finding some ways to go about figuring this out and structuring this out in a way that makes it a bit easier for people to also do this themselves and not necessarily just rely on experts to come in and find these sort of things.
That's fantastic. It reminds me a bit of a conversation I had with another fellow podcaster, and actually a big example for me. He's called John Lee Dumas. He has a podcast called EO Fire. He was making Q&As, and I asked him some questions, and he was talking about personalization, and there's many ways in which you can, and many levels as well, in which you can do personalization, and that small tweak of talking about the kind of person that you are, maybe not to, I mean, the systems, it's relatively easy to change a variable and say it's Melinda Jacobs instead of any salesman, but when you target it to make very small things and people feel it's for them, and you're actually designing for them, it can make a massive difference, even if the tweak is small, if what you perceive outside of it as a designer is small, but the perception and the sensations and what you make the users feel is extra powerful, and of course it can make a huge difference, as Melinda is saying, and I'm sure that's the case of your massive success.
Well, but this is also, this is why we look at games and we say, okay, they do such a great job because they create narratives that people feel a part of. This is why they're so engaging. This is why people get so involved in them, why they enjoy them so much. It's because it's a narrative that they're able to be a part of.
Yes.
They're able to understand. They're able to go into detail with and feel like it becomes a part of them. And, when things aren't working or when platforms are being rejected or people aren't connecting at events or whatever kind of experience is being created that people aren't connecting with, well, the odds are just that, they want to be able to answer the question of who am I in this experience? What does this experience mean to me as a person? And where do I fit in? How can I actually get as close as you want me to with this? And if I feel like I'm not even welcome in this experience, even if you didn't mean to, it's never going to connect.
Indeed, definitely. So Melinda, is there any process that you follow when you apply gamification, when you use it to consult a company? What are maybe the steps or the general ideas? How do you approach these projects? What is, again, if you have a process, fantastic. If not, what's the way in which you approach these projects?
Wow, everyone always loves me for this. But one of the first things I make everyone do is simplify, simplify, simplify. No matter whether they just have a concept, an idea, if they're just kind of struggling with their thoughts, or if they've built an entire platform. I make everyone get down to what is truly the core of the story that they're telling. Why are they doing this? A lot of people get lost up in functionality. And so, you have a brainstorm and they'll be talking about, oh, we need this message system, or we also needed to do this, or we need badges, or this or that. And what we're talking about there is functionality. We're talking about processes that we want to help people complete and things we're adding to that process. But before we can even get to that step, what we need to do is we need to say, okay, what are we trying to tell? Because in order to then move on to those user flows, in order to move on to that system design, in order to think about, okay, here's actually the journey of the user in this story, or here's actually the journey of this narrative that we're telling, you have to know what it is you're telling. And it's very tempting to want to include everything, because of course, everyone's passionate about what they're building, and that's an amazing thing, and it's so fun to see, but it's also okay to just have one core story and not always have to list out every single thing you might possibly do within that story. Because, one of the things that I like to try to do when I help people go down this design process is create a sparring partner for themselves. Create something that they can actually bounce ideas off of and know what the answer is in return. Because too often, because people don't really know, okay, what is my core story I'm telling? What's my core narrative? They get very lost in is this the right design decision? Is this the right experiment to test to see, okay, hey, does this actually work with people? Do they actually connect with it? Because they don't have that buddy standing next to them saying oh no, absolutely not, because it doesn't fit. Or, okay, yes, that's absolutely perfect. And so as far as my process is, one of the things I try to do is just get them back to that basic point, try to help people build themselves a sparring partner that we can then use along the design decisions that we're going to make when we start to look at the user flows and say, okay, hey, here's actually all of the things that we need people to give us, and here's the things we're going to give them in return, and how do we get all of this balance? And this is also, in a way, how games are designed. It always starts with the narrative. The experience is just the part that allows people to become close to that narrative, to interact with that narrative, to experience it, and hopefully come away with, whether it's behavior change or opinion change or entertainment, there's a wide variety of results. But that's a really big step. And of course, to talk about results, that's kind of step 2 then. Okay, once you know the story you want to tell, you also have to know what it is that you want people to walk away with your experience feeling. This is also something games do. It's maybe more about emotions than sometimes it is about, okay, actual behaviors or gathering data or whatever we do in sort of the gamification, game-inspired sphere. But if you know what story you're telling and why you want people to, or what you want people to walk away with, or what you want people to feel in that story, yeah, that's such a strong sparring partner. You're going to be able to answer almost all of your questions because it will be obvious.
Definitely will be, because once you know what you're talking about, you have clear what's the whole overarching theme, what is it that you want to achieve. Everything else can spring from that initial analysis. And that's why being very careful and very deliberate about what you're doing in that step is foundational for anything that you do. I completely agree with you, Melinda.
And being very transparent about, again, what you're asking for from the user and what you're willing to give them, because and this is why thinking of it sort of as a story you're telling is a helpful way to approach this, because it is a dialogue. No matter how much gamification you use, it's not a one-sided conversation where you're giving someone something and you're just trying to give them enough so that they continue. It's always going to be a dialogue, and there will always be shifting moments, and there will always be potential opportunities and also potential pitfalls. And if you know what this story is that you're telling, and you look at the design of your experience as a dialogue, because again, games are interactive. This is one of the things that make them different from some more standard traditional things like books or movies. They can be interactive, of course, in their own ways, but games really build these environments that we can go into and we can actually touch the narrative so much closer. And if you start by following this process, by really getting your foundation good, even if it feels like it's going a bit slower, even if it feels like you're not getting to the fun, gamified game thinking part of it, it's, you're going to speed up much faster in the long run, and you're going to be able to do so much more because you're going to have the headspace for that.
Yeah, definitely. Engagers, quick break from this interview. If you love what gamification can achieve, then you will love going to a gamification conference. And this year, we got a 10% discount for the Engagers to assist to Gamification Europe 2018 in Amsterdam. All you have to do is get your tickets for the conference at professorgame.com/gamification Europe. That's our affiliate link. It was an incredible experience in 2017, full of chances to learn and interact with the top experts. If you think you want to make it, get your tickets sooner rather than later. Their prices are only going up and tickets might run out. So click pause and go to professorgame.com/gamification Europe to get your tickets discounted today and also support Professor Game. And now, Melinda, we're going to go into what we like to call the second part of our interview. And here we're going beyond the story, more for perhaps practical tips, advice, and perhaps some information that we would like to know from you, from your preferences, etc. And the first question is, if there's something that you could say is like what maybe you could call a best practice or something that almost any gamification project could benefit from.
Not thinking of gamification as a practice. It's really easy to get caught up in thinking, okay, gamification is the adding of these mechanics, but that can also really throw a wrench in the works because you get caught up then on just jumping ahead too fast to add these mechanics in because you think that that's what's going to cause the engagement. And so I think my best advice would be, recognize that games and game design and game thinking is an excellent way to approach a project and can absolutely create a more engaging experience. But don't forget that it's not just these mechanics. It's not just plugging things in that games use. It's the way that games are designed. It's the way that the designers think about them and build them and invite people to experience with them that matters.
When people mention this, I always like to fall back and remind some people, because it's easy to forget that there's great games that function fantastic and that many people are enjoying and want to play. And there's games that are not, and they might be very similar to a very successful game. And the difference probably is in the way that these games were designed, how they were targeted for the specific audience, how they were very thoughtful about how to engage their users and all these things. And these differences can be very slight, very small. But if you forget that, if you think that just adding gamification will make your project amazing, then you're wrong. You have to do it and do it the right way.
Oh, absolutely. And this is also, I think, a common misconception is that gamification will help you prolong your project for life. But all games also have expiration dates. And there's very, 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 very few games that actually manage to keep people in it for months, let alone years. And yeah, sure, we see those examples a lot because, of course, they're very widely known. They're widely played. People look at the persistent world. They look at the fact that you're interacting with other people in it, and they say, this is what games are. But, games are also defined by our expectations at the time. How many of us really thought that we were going to be clicking on cows in Farmville for as long as we all did? If we look at it now and you put a game out like that, people would also be like, yeah, okay, we've been there, done that. That's just a bunch of clicking, I think I said at one point it was the gamification of clicking that it made clicking more interesting. But, that's a perfect example of something that it had a life cycle. It was incredibly engaging at the time, but it couldn't figure out a way for it to be sustainable because at a certain point, that type of game, that type of experience, the narrative wasn't strong enough for it to be, as long lived as it even maybe could have been if there would have been some tweaks. And yeah, games are indeed good at engaging, but you also have to think of this in your own project of where does this fit in someone's life? they have a life outside of your experience. And yes, your goal as a designer is to design in that experience and keep people engaged in that. But you have to consider the fact that they have another life outside of it.
That's definitely true. And it happens that people actually have a life beyond whatever it is that you're designing.
I know it's shocking, everyone's
Yeah, shocking
always
enough.
surprised. They're like, "Wait, what?" And this is not the only thing going on in my users' world.
In the universities and masters, when you're doing these programs, it's easy for professors and I'm going to blame myself for sure as well, to forget that people are actually doing other things. I mean, when it's part-time because people are also working and have a life outside whatever it is they're learning. So it's easy to forget, but it's fundamental not to forget it.
Absolutely.
So speaking of games, and we were talking about good games and bad games, what would you say, Melinda, is your favorite game?
Well, like I said earlier, I love Mass Effect because I love the way it was designed. I think, discussions about the ending of the third game aside, it's so interesting to see a narrative where you're really forced to make a choice. And that choice is actually going to come back just like in real life and actually affect you potentially later on. And I really like that design element. And I think they did a great job in incorporating that type of thinking where, you really don't know if you made the right choice or not. And that's also with sort of that sliding spectrum of you're not just either good or bad. There's kind of a mixture of both of them. And okay, maybe you lean more sort of bad is it's more rebel versus sort of going out of your way for others, but you're always a mixture of both of them. It's not so much that you're just one or the other. You have both in your character that you're building up in this game, and I really like the fact that like something like Infamous, it's a bit more you're good or you're bad, and it's more clear cut, and that's also a fun gameplay. But if you really want to get people thinking, if you want them to really immerse and take something away also after the experience, I think the more complex of a narrative you can create, the better. But I also like Okami. Okami is also one of my favorites. The artwork in it is absolutely gorgeous, and it's a perfect example of a very storytelling, very narrative-based game. That's just really well designed.
Haven't played either of them. I'll try and see if I can get a chance.
You should definitely give it a little bit of a spin. Okami is a little bit easier because it's progressive based, so you can try it out a little bit, and you don't necessarily have to wait till much later points in the game to see things sort of come into action. But
Melinda, speaking of games and gamification designers and game designers as well, is there any person that you would enjoy listening to in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Well, actually, I would love to listen to T.O. Taylor. She is an academic and has written quite a bit on games, on the community of them, also on esports as well. And I really think she has a really, really interesting way of looking at games in general and how they affect people and how they affect our culture.
Fantastic.
Would love to see her on here.
We'll try to contact with T.O. Taylor.
Yeah. Because you've had pretty much, because I was thinking about that as well, and I'm just like, actually a lot of other people you've already had on here that I would definitely recommend, but I think she'd be an interesting one.
I'm sure. And is there any book that you would recommend to the engagers, to this audience? It could be directly related to gamification or game design or not necessarily. Is there something you would recommend?
Pretty much anything by Dan Ariely. One of the books that comes to mind is Predictably Irrational. And what he writes a lot about is about how we behave as humans. And so, for example, like Predictably Irrational, the hidden forces that shape our decisions. And I think if you're going to be a good designer, again, to sometimes take a step back from thinking just about mechanics or thinking just about systems, but also thinking about people and how people behave and what's important to people, and where are these people in your life, and not just user personas that sometimes they're super useful, but can sometimes err on stereotypical, but understanding sort of that the most important part about understanding people is that you can't actually predict them that much. They're always, you can kind of figure out a little bit about where their mind is going to be at, but at the same time, you have to kind of be prepared for the fact that they're people. They're not a part of your design. You're not designing your user. You're designing an experience for them where hopefully they can be a full person within. So I really like his writing. He's also done some TED Talks. Definitely recommend pretty much anything.
He is super interesting as well. So definitely recommend any book, and any of his talks are really, really interesting. He's quite a character.
Definitely.
Melinda, what would you say is your superpower when designing gamification? Is there something that you would call your sweet spot?
Well, I mean, definitely it's a lot about seeing how people relate to stories. Because I really find it interesting how people connect with each other. I find it interesting how they respond to different environments and situations and stories that they're either put into or put themselves into. And I think what I bring a lot to the table in my work and in what I do is finding the way to help people find these narratives, to tell these narratives, and help them understand how people are telling their own stories within the story that they're telling, and being able to not just think of this sort of in this storytelling creative core of the being of the project fashion, but also in a very systematic world where it's like, okay, we have this, but also help people then take it to this bigger picture of a system where you see sort of all of the different pathways you can take and make some decisions along that way and see how things interact with one another. And I think that big picture, the ability, to go sort of from the core to the big picture and back and forth is as you put it, a superpower in that way.
and that's why Melinda's talk in Gamification Europe last year was something around the lines of, why does gamification suck without narrative? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
We'll link it in the show notes as well for you to delight yourself. It's on YouTube, it's available. So Melinda, we're now going to go into a slightly gamified section of the podcast. And we're going to get into a question that's asked by the audience. However, I do not know which of the questions will be, and certainly you won't either until I give you the question. So
the suspense is real.
Definitely. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to get a question. Okay. So this is a high school science teacher. He or she says, I've heard many good things of gamification, but I feel it sounds more of a thing to teach things like history and social sciences. However, do you think it would also be useful for a biology lab or a biology class? Can you give me any initial thoughts or path to follow if I want to use it for my classroom?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I think this comes down to, again, the perspective of what is gamification. And what all is a narrative. And in the case of something like science or in biology, there's so many narratives out there. And, one of the ways that we as humans learn best is when we try things, when we do things, when we play. There's all of this room for us to go out and learn about a different topic. And, okay, we can memorize it and we can maybe repeat it and we can maybe say, yeah, okay, I read here this. But when you actually let us play with it, when you let us fail with it, when you let us succeed with it and we start to learn ourselves when we're actually interacting with it, how it works and what the rules are and why it is this manner, you let us get curious about it. This is something that gamification really can do, regardless of the topic, because there's always a story. Whenever you're teaching in a classroom or standing up trying to educate students on a topic, you're telling them stories. And, I don't see any reason why any story would not be able to have an element of play or an element of engagement with it. I mean, that's ideally what we want at the end of the day. I mean, look, for example, at a very good, actually a really good example for the science world of gamification is a game called Folded. And I'm pretty sure that Folded is the actual name of it. But what it was a protein folding experience where people tried to fold proteins in different ways. And basically the scientific community used this to outsource things that they didn't just want to have computers running, because humans, we have a bit of intuition that still to this point we haven't really been able to replicate by any type of intelligence or computer system. And actually people made some pretty big discoveries by just playing this game. And these are people who would maybe otherwise never have even known that proteins could fold, But this is a story that they managed to tell through an experience and help people interact with this narrative. So yeah, in short, absolutely. What you just have to figure out is what it is you want to tell the students and ways you can engage them in that play and spark that curiosity and help them get a little closer to that topic rather than just necessarily maybe reading or watching something. And that's where gamification can come into play, or good design or interactive design, whatever whatever, all of us, we all call it different, but at the end of the day, it has the same goal.
Yeah, and what could be more playful than, I mean, of course, within the rules of safety, but what could be more playful than a lab, whether it's biology, physics, chemistry? Like, there's so many things that can be done, so much to experiment. Like, there's so many ways that there could be things that could be done. I think that it's actually a fantastic opportunity to apply gamification. So there you have some recommendations by Melinda. This is actually something we had a teacher before this who is I'm not sure what Tracy Wazinegger is, but she was with Tracy and John, who are probably the previous like 2 episodes back, and she made an escape room for her science class. So there's many interesting things that you could do, and especially go to Tracy's episode. Perhaps it's a double episode, and Tracy and John, and listen a bit to what she says, to what the things that she's experimented with, and I'm sure you'll get many things that you can use for your class.
Yeah, because there's a lot of ways. I mean, again, what games are good at is creating interactive experiences. So yeah, whether it's a puzzle, when you take some of the rules of chemistry and you try to teach people, okay, how do these things all work together, and you create different puzzles from it, or whether you, create an escape room where, okay, you have to have some of this knowledge in order to, to complete it. And, the more the knowledge actually relates to the way that it actually works in real life, and not just more like, okay, hey, we're just testing to see if you understand this concept, the more people are going to walk away with it. Because, it's actually something that they're ingrained in. And this is also how people can memorize and know a whole bunch about complexities in different game environments. I'm sure there's some students out there that know a lot more about different potion combinations in various MMORPGs than they do actually about chemistry, just purely for the fact it had an actual purpose in the game. It felt like that you understood the need of why it was useful to learn these things, to have these shortcuts to work with this. And I think, it's a lot of possibilities with that.
And magic potions could be one of the themes that you could go around if it's a chemistry class, for example.
Possibilities are endless.
Definitely. So, Melinda, is there any final piece of advice you would like to leave our engagers with?
Just mostly, don't be too intimidated by the idea of trying to work with telling stories in interactive and playful manners. I mean, it can seem really overwhelming sometimes, because it seems like there's so many ways to go, that there's so much knowledge you need to have, so much knowledge on mechanics. You have to be a systematic thinker, but it really all starts with a story, and it starts with what you want people to get out of that story you're telling. And if you can figure that out, there's a lot of people, whether it's, if you need a specific skill or you need a specific opinion, you can find those people that can help you tell that story. But you shouldn't be afraid to actually just start to find that story yourself and start to explore, like, okay, how would I tell this? How would I go about, whether, again, it's creating a really fictional world or just enhancing an already existing physics or already existing ways or already existing cultural aspects. But just start with those stories, because every good project like this, no matter how complicated it might seem, or no matter how complicated it is at this point in time, it starts with that core. And the rest is just a way to facilitate it, to just tell it.
Thank you very much for that advice as well. Melinda, can you tell us how can we connect with you? Any pages or any places you want for us to follow you, I don't know, on social media, ways to get in touch with you? And then we'll say it's game over.
Well, you can find me on Twitter, Melinda Jacobs. I'm sure there will probably be links as well with this podcast. But you can also find me and my company on subatomic.nl, because we are based in the Netherlands, so have the .nl domain. And otherwise, you can send me an email. My email address is on the website, LinkedIn, you name it, I'm sure.
Melinda is everywhere.
Well, I am everywhere. I'm probably on too many different things. That's a side danger of jobs with things like this, is that you always have to check out everything new. And so what that can mean is that you end up with like a gazillion accounts on so many different platforms that you can hardly even remember.
Especially the passwords that get more and more complicated.
Yeah. Though I have to say, is like GDPR did some favors, the Data Protection Act, because of course all of a sudden now a whole bunch of things that I've signed up for couldn't even send me emails unless I confirmed it. So that helped me clean up my inbox a little bit. The side effect.
People got scared, and that kind of helped in many things. So
at least over here in Europe.
Yes, definitely. So Melinda, thank you very much for your time. It's been a long time coming since we met in Gamification Europe. But I wanted to thank you again for being here, for interacting with us and giving all that advice and all that experience to the engagers. But now it's time to say game over.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, engagers, and thank you again for listening to Professor Game Podcast. If you want more interviews with incredible guests like Melinda, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started in our email list. That way we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of opportunities like that amazing discount that we got for Gamification Europe. Remember, that's in professorgame.com/gamification Europe. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know how Dave is able to integrate tabletop games into his classroom? And then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!